All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Who has been to every week that we've had so far? A few people, cool. Yeah.
Okay.
What was week one? What did we cover in week one?
Universal reconciliation for universal worship.
Yeah, so biblical basis for mission. My next question was, what was the key takeaway?
He took it.
What's another key takeaway? What is something we talked about in week one?
The Old Covenant and the New Covenant.
Yeah, which the Old and New Covenant are a part of.
Meta-narrative of Scripture.
Yeah, meta-narrative of Scripture. What is meta-narrative?
That, the overarching,
Big
what
picture
it is
story.
about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is, like, could you sum up in like a sentence the meta-narrative of Scripture? What would it be?
Was it? It wasn't the universal.
Can be, yeah.
Okay. Was it universal
Say it, just
reconciliation
say it.
for universal
Sure,
worship?
that works.
Okay.
God
Yeah.
bringing all peoples to himself.
Yeah, God's purpose from the beginning of Scripture to end of Scripture is to bring people to Himself. Universal reconciliation for universal worship. What was week 2?
Unreached people groups, 1040 window.
Unreached people groups, 1040 window. What was the big takeaway from that?
The task or meeting. Or wait. Yeah. Right.
If that was your takeaway, yeah.
What did you take away,
I'm
Erica?
feeling really self-conscious right now.
No, just because you're regurgitating terms.
But my takeaway was the task remaining, like seeing,
Yeah.
like, it was a panta ta ethne. I love that, like all peoples, not just like nations being like a geographical place,
Yeah.
but all people.
Yeah. What's the collection of the area of the world where most unreached people are? What's that called?
1040
Yeah, the
window?
1040 window.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Where do most Christian missionaries go, and where do churches send most of their missional money to? Reach places, yeah. Really good. All right, what was week 3 about?
Church planning?
Yeah.
Or no?
Yeah. What was the big takeaway of church planning?
Anyone can do.
Yeah. Anyone can do it?
I remember the 4 quadrants of like recreating church planning with taking like creating leaders through discipleship and
Yeah.
then recreating it.
What was it called? Does anybody remember?
The seed harvest, or no.
It's got 4 in it.
Fields?
Yeah, 4
4
fields. Yeah, the 4 fields is really cool. Like, if we think about participants going to a reached country, for them to understand like what field that country is in will help them understand like how and where to focus their ministry. Like, if you're going to Central America, your focus in that 4 field might be more towards discipleship, right? Like encouraging believers. Whereas if you're going to a very unreached country like Lebanon, your field might be planting seeds. You know, so it kind of help participants understand where they can focus their energy for ministry. What was week 4 about?
That's today, right?
Today.
Yeah. All right, so today we're going to start talking about culture, and actually the next 2 weeks, so next week if you're here with us, we're also going to talk about culture. And so today we really want to talk about culture kind of at a surface level, secular culture. And then the next week we're going to take culture and kind of contextualize it and talk about how we can use culture to our advantage when we are sharing the gospel and we're trying to portray a gospel message with people. And so today we want to talk about just basic culture. So we're not going to be in a lot of scripture today, but if you remember what we learned today, next week we're going to use scripture and help apply some of that. So before we get a little deeper, watch a video. This is, if you guys know HSBC Bank, they're a global bank, and they used to have these string of commercials that highlight cultural misunderstandings. So we're going to watch a few of those. Yeah, so we could probably relate to some of those. I remember, I can really relate to the food one. And during my teams on the world race and my team's time in India, we went to a village for the first time. And, you know, we're eating this chicken curry rice or something. It's really good. I like the taste of it, but they heap so much food onto your plate. And Lindsay Irvin, a lot of you know her, she was on my team. And I was, finishing my plate, And she did not like curry. She didn't want to eat it, so she thought she'd be like super snarky and sneaky, and she dumped all of her food on my plate and was like, "Oh, I'm done." And the next thing you know, the woman came up and like a whole other portion on her plate. It's hilarious. She never gave me any food after that. But so the thing here is like a lot of us can relate to these things where we go into a different culture and something happens and we don't understand, and we kind of just have to be a little bit reactive in the moment, like go through the awkwardness of it, and afterwards we're like, what just happened? And so the goal here is if we kind of increase our cultural intelligence, we're better prepared to not have to deal with these situations in the moment and not understand what's happening. We can kind of posture ourselves to be more expectant and understanding, so we go into these cultural situations. We don't have to rely on misunderstandings or gaffes to get to know another culture. Does that make sense? So part of what we're going to talk about this morning is to give us some tools to help prepare us to kind of anticipate a culture and what we might expect from them. So here's kind of where we're going. These are some of our objectives. We're going to talk about what is culture, what is my culture, what is their culture, and then how do we make up that difference? Because my culture and their culture, we're going to kind of identify some discrepancies. So how do we close that gap? Some of the key questions we're going to ask are, what are my cultural values, and how does that affect my interpersonal interactions? So what I believe, the value system that I have, how does that affect how I interact and engage with people? And then second, what does a person's actions communicate about their beliefs and values? So when you go into a different culture, the thing that you're seeing most prevalent is the things that they're doing. But instead of taking that and applying it to your own context, we want to learn how to take that information and what they're doing and think through what value system might be the underbelly of what is causing them to live their life that way. So as we do that, we want to be careful of some things. So here are some do's and don'ts. So this morning we're going to use some specific examples. I usually refer to them as like cultural clusters. So like these would be a region. So for example, we're going to talk about Nordic culture a little bit later. And so that would be a cluster. So we want to use general cluster information as a best first guess, but we don't want to assume that everyone within a cluster has the same cultural value. Right? For everyone in this room, like we're mostly Western, we're American, but we still have varying values. So we can look at American culture, we can look at Nordic culture and come up with some ideas, but that's a starting point, not the end point. We want to remember to be descriptive, not prescriptive. So oftentimes, like you're going to go into a different culture. I'll use Sub-Saharan Africa as an example. One thing that you may notice is that the women do a lot of the work around the house. They do the chores, they do the cleaning, they do the cooking. They serve the men usually, and the men are kind of just sitting around. They're not really a part of those chores. Our inclination is to say the men are lazy, but that's prescriptive, right? We want to describe what we're seeing without applying our interpretation to it immediately. All right, and the biggest one for me is you want to invest time in learning about an individual, not apply broad generalizations. So we could talk about Nordic culture all day. I could be an expert on Nordic culture, but I don't want to apply that broad generalization because every person, every individual has their own cultural value system. So the goal here is when you go to a different country, not to think about how just to engage with Nordic people. You want to spend your focus and your energy on engaging this specific person. That's the goal, knowing an individual. Any questions so far? Sound good? All right, so what is culture? So at your tables, I'm going to take a few minutes and give it your best to come up with one sentence that defines culture. A one-sentence definition of what is culture.
Yeah.
Okay, so who wants to give me a sentence? Give me a definition of culture.
That was great.
Culture is what people make of the world around them. It's very simple, but basically, like all the things that we see are products of what we've decided to do with what, like the raw materials, and then as we make that, it starts to reflect what our values are. It reflects what we think is important. It reflects what we want to do with the world. So if we make a bunch of highways, like that reflects our value for that. Or we were saying like this is a cultural object that reflects our value for hydration or whatever. But it's what we make of the world.
Okay. Might be more than one sentence, but
Yes.
kidding, that's good. What else?
Let's go.
Culture is atmosphere. Traditions is the atmosphere, the traditions, and overall vibe of a group of people.
Okay. All right. What else?
Say values and norms that determine a way of life for a group of people.
Oh, sounds
Okay.
official.
Yeah, we pretty much agree with all of that, plus Google.
Plus Google. What does Google say?
Google says,
The arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively.
oh, your Google didn't, she gave us a different Google.
Social behavior norms found in human society.
Oh,
Okay.
that makes sense.
A
Yeah.
little simpler.
Here are a couple of definitions that you might find on the internet. Customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. So they kind of break down 3 different types of groups to describe culture. The integrated pattern of human knowledge, belief, and behavior that depends upon the capacity for learning and transmitting knowledge to succeeding generations. A little bit more nuanced and deeper. They talk about the progression through time of culture. My personal definition of culture, the collection and relationship between beliefs, values, and actions. And because I'm teaching, we're going to use this definition. So I like the idea of talking about a collection and a relationship because beliefs, values, and actions cannot live isolated. They are in deep relationship with one another. So in basic humanity, everyone believes something. All right, you cannot be human without believing in something. What you believe then affects how you live your life. Those would be maybe like your rituals. These are your actions. So I believe something, so I have a value system around that belief, and then because of that value system, that's what I use to make my decisions. So it's a collection and also a relationship. So to kind of like explain this example, on your tables, you have a packet, it's face down, called Body Rituals Among the Nasarima. It's a little bit of a thick packet, so there's only one. So what I want you guys to do, there's highlighted sections there. So at your table, have someone read through the highlighted sections, and then afterwards talk about some of the things you observe, and then talk about maybe some of the things that these people might value. All right, so what are some of your observations?
that's a lot like an American.
Yeah, did you guys pick up on it? Did you get it? Who got it?
No.
Nasarima is American backwards.
Oh,
I
I didn't get
I
that.
didn't get that.
What do
We
you mean
picked
we
up on
have,
it.
like, is she talking about
Everything you're describing
orthodontists?
is like,
Like
So-
doctors, like the medicine men, or like
It's
written
writing
down as
prescriptions,
The
like,
shrines are
that you give to the pharmacist, who then you
and you get like magic
think
things you have to put in your mouth and make you better.
brush your teeth.
And toothbrushes.
And the toothbrushing.
Yeah, this is about Americans. So this is written from the perspective of a tribesman in Africa going to America for the first time.
Whoa.
So the way he writes about our culture, he's like describing it in a very different way, and some of his presuppositions may be correct, but some of them sound a bit wrong, right?
Right.
So the idea here is if you go into another culture and you describe it and observe it and interpret it based on your own belief system, you're going to get it wrong. And you're not actually getting to the basis of what these people believe and what their value systems are. Right? So some of the things like brushing your teeth or maybe bathrooms or prescription drugs, whereas he may observe those things as being like super selfish and careful, and we care about the appearance, which is true. We also do a lot of those things for health reasons, right? So the idea is when we go to a different culture, we go to a different country, if we take what we see with our eyes and apply it to our own internal belief system, we're creating a generalization for them that's probably false. So if we want to be culturally intelligent, if we want to be cultural experts, we need to remove the American filter. We need to take off our American glasses and see another person's culture in its original state. For us to genuinely get to the heart of what they believe, why they believe it, and how they choose to live their life. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So we don't want to repeat the mistakes of how this guy does it. So, the culture iceberg. Have you guys ever heard of this kind of like analogy? People use the iceberg to explain lots of different things, so this is not like a new thing, but I like to use it to talk about culture. So if you remember my definition, the collection and relationship of beliefs, values, and actions, this is how I break it up. So this line right here represents like the surface, right? This is what you see above the water. So when it comes to iceberg, you see the action. But we know that iceberg, like 20% of an iceberg is visible above the water, but the rest of it, about 80%, is below the water that you can't see. So a larger portion of the iceberg exists below the sea level. So you have actions on top. Your value system underneath, what you can't see, is helping you make decisions for your actions. And at the very bottom is going to be your belief system. So your beliefs are going to inform your value system, and your values would inform how you live your life. So what would you say are some of our American values?
Freedom.
Okay. What belief system would be the underbelly of us valuing freedom?
Give me my guns. Don't colonize me. We're free. Don't hold us down. No government. No taxes. Don't feed overboard.
Okay, so maybe
Freedom.
your belief is more about like individualism,
Yeah.
Oh.
like your right as an individual, and your value would be freedom. So what would be some of the actions?
Freedom of speech.
Yeah, some civil liberties.
Yeah. Equality.
Yeah. What's another value that we have in America?
Like education.
Education. Okay, what would be the belief?
Being intelligent is the most important thing.
Oh.
Like, I value for intelligence.
Okay.
Or
Intelligence, education. What would be some of the actions? Debt.
forced to go to school.
Yeah. Yeah, school for until like from 4 until 18,
Mhm.
and then college, university.
Okay. Let's use a value of efficiency. What would be a belief for efficiency?
Faster is better.
Faster is better. What would be an action?
Impatience.
Give me a practical example.
Like our restaurants,
line.
we don't even get out of our car to go to a restaurant. You stay in your car, you
Yeah.
get food in your car, and you eat while you drive.
Or using the Peach Pass.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's use, so drive-through would be like an
Yeah.
action. Let's start with drive-through as an action. What would be some of the values below that?
Convenience.
Efficiency.
Yeah.
And then what would be a belief?
My time is
Yeah.
valuable.
Time is
Mhm.
most important.
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah?
There's maybe like even a step deeper, like there's not enough time,
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
or there's never enough time.
Living in the moment. Yeah. What would be, so think back some of your travels in some of the cultures or countries you've been to, and you've seen some actions that are unfamiliar to you. What are some of those?
What are the actions that are unfamiliar?
Yeah, name some things that are like countercultural to you.
Cutting in line.
Cutting in line. What would be a value system for that?
Try not to be sarcastic, 'cause it really frustrates me. What are they doing? I don't know. It's a cultural norm. Just everybody does it. I don't know what the answer is there.
So are you saying like what's our belief system around lines or theirs?
No, so take off your glasses.
Yeah.
So let's rephrase it. There's not a queue system. What would be a value system that creates that idea, that action?
Order,
Immediacy.
control,
What'd you say?
order and control.
Order and control. And Kate, what did you say?
Well, if there's no system, then I don't know that order is a value, but like immediacy, like
First come,
what's,
first
yeah,
served.
first come, first served, what's right in front of you.
What could be a belief system that underlies that idea?
Honoring time.
Mhm.
It can also be like kind of a poverty mindset, like if I'm not first in line, I won't get food or something like that, and so they just like.
Yeah. So with Katie's example of honoring time, that's counterintuitive to us, right? So if we see people cutting in line, we would maybe interpret that their value is not about honoring time, that they're just really selfish. But if you take off your glasses and you think through it, we could arrive at the conclusion of people cutting in line could be a value for honor, which is really different for us. It's hard for us to comprehend. But the idea here is we don't want to take someone's action that we're seeing and then come over to our cultural iceberg and apply it to our value system and our belief system, because we're going to get mismatched. So the idea here is when you're meeting an individual and when you're in a different culture, you want to kind of put your iceberg to the wayside.
Right.
And you want to look at their actions and determine what might be their value system and their belief system. Because chances are you might then conclude with a more honoring perspective or generalization of who they are.
Is like being late. I feel like that's a really obvious example, like people not being on time to a meeting, or like that's where we can understand, or we can put away like our value for like punctuality and say like, oh, their value for relationship, or like the thing that's happening right in front of them. I can understand that, even though this action really bothers me in my belief system, I can see. Is that a good example?
Yeah, so I would say like for our iceberg, our action would to be on time. And the value system and belief system under there is like it's honoring to the people around us. Well, and their cultural iceberg, being on time is not going to be their action. Our action that we see would be them being late. But the value system and belief system under that is also to honor the people around them. But if we swap it and we say, oh, they're being late, and then apply it to our value system of how we honor the people around us, we come to the conclusion that they're just rude and inconsiderate. When in reality, they're actually very considerate because they're focusing on the relationships immediately around them. Yeah, it's a good example. Does this make sense? Any other questions on that? All right. You're in a boat with your mother, your spouse, and your child when the boat starts sinking. You can only save one person. Who do you save? Think about it for a minute.
It's a terrible question. It's clearly miserable.
How many of you would save your mother? Nobody.
Wait.
Sorry,
give us
Mom.
a second. Give us a second.
Who would save your spouse? 1, 2 people, 3 people. Who would save your child?
How old
Okay,
is this child?
doesn't matter.
I don't know.
Can't decide.
None of them.
It's too late. The boat's done. Let's go.
Okay, no one survived.
Okay, so Bill and Megan, you're the only ones that said you would save your spouse, or maybe you did. Okay, the 3 of you. What are some of your reasonings for that?
That was, okay, that was morbidly one of them. But also, just of like, I don't know, like in premarital counseling, it's we've talked a lot about like order and balance, and so it's like the Lord, your spouse, kids, everyone else.
Wow.
And so it's like keeping with that balance, then spouse is next important to God, so.
Okay. Do you guys have answers that differ from that?
Yeah, mine are very practical. One is a survival instinct, and I don't know how well I do at life without my wife. And the other is like just thinking about it in my case, like I have 3 kids, and when I think about the impact on my other kids of either losing a brother or sister or losing their mom, it's way more valuable for me to keep my wife involved in that equation than my other kid.
Okay. So for those of you who would save your child, what are some of your reasonings for that?
It's really hard for me to, like, the theoretical love that I have for a now non-existent child is like what I'm going off of, you know? But I like to think generationally. And so, like, even if I were to, like, if I were literally to die tomorrow, but, like, say I already had a child, hopefully there were things that I would have instilled in them, even if it was just through prayers, that they could go, because, like, theoretically they'll live for another 50 years, 80 years. I might live for 50 years, probably not 80, you know? So thinking future
Okay.
and my
Future
theoretical
oriented.
spouse that I do not have to, like, I don't, it's hard, like.
Yep. Anyone else? Why would you save your child?
My logic was that the child would be less likely to help themselves, where I would hope and expect that my spouse or maybe my mother would be able to sort it out.
Okay.
Higher probability.
Figure it out.
Okay. Okay, so some of the values I'm hearing there would be like future orientation, like a value for innocence. They couldn't help themselves, so I should help them. Probability.
I think Robbie would be legitimately pissed at me if I saved him.
Right.
When I'm stepmom than
Yeah.
if I saved Noah. Like if he lived and Noah didn't,
Oh, interesting.
I'm not positive that it would be a tricky marriage.
Yeah.
I mean,
Lose both.
if I had an option, I know for a fact he would say, don't you dare touch me, like grab a kid.
So without considering his reaction, would you have a different answer?
No.
You would still save Noah.
Yes, probably goes to the state of my marriage in some respects. I could live without Robbie. But I've operated as that for a long time, also because I lost a parent at a young age. So I've seen a spouse live without another spouse. So I know what it looks like to exist without him in a realm. I can imagine it and picture it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine my life without Noah, nor do I want to at this point. But I love Robbie deeply. Please don't hear me. But I don't need Robbie in that respect. I don't need Noah either, but there's innocence, there are things, but
Yeah.
I could function in life without him, it would suck, but I could do it.
So among Americans and Westerners, 70% would save their child, 20% would save their spouse, and 10% refuse to answer. You're part of the 10%.
Wow.
70% of Westerners would save their child.
What is Western? Who is included?
Anglo. Yeah, Western European, US, Canada.
And our brown friends as well.
So 70% would save their child, 20% would save their spouse, and 10% wouldn't answer.
Wow.
So in Eastern culture,
Save their mother.
over 95% would save their mother.
Because of the value of the maternal.
So what would be some of their what would be their value system for saving their mother?
Honor.
Eldership.
Yeah.
Wisdom.
Would you say wisdom?
Yeah.
Like a value for
Yeah.
the older
I know, like-
generation?
They were raised by them, they honor them, and they're also the people that are probably advising them on their own families.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, and I might be up here and stretching too far, but thinking of a lot of Eastern religions, there's kind of like ideas like karma and stuff in there, and also a very high, like, there's like ancestral worship and things like that, and so there's almost this like, what happens if I don't save my mother
Mhm.
type of thinking, of like, there would be more punishment from the whatever if I didn't take care of my mother versus spouse or children.
Yeah, it could be. And you think of some like tribal religions, they could have a fear that their mother, who would become then their ancestor, and then a spirit could actually like bring negative energy on them. Could be. Yeah.
In the Swazi context, the grandmother is the connection to the ancestors. So by saving that, you're also saving shame from the rest of your family, because they now still have their connections that they need to navigate their life spiritually.
Yeah. So the top two answers, reasons for why people in Near East culture would save their mother. The first one is, my mother gave me life, I owe her my life.
Whoa.
Dang.
That's
Yeah? And the second one would be, you can marry someone else, you can have another child, you only get one mother. Those are the top 2 reasons why they would choose their mother. So like there's a totally different value system. So at the surface, you could think like, oh, that person let their child die. How cruel. But in reality, there's a value system there that they did that out of a place of honor. Does that make sense? So this is really cool. Like, I love using surveys like this. There's, if you like Google cultural surveys, there's a lot of examples that kind of give you results of questions like this for different cultures that give you a really cool snapshot into how people think, what actions they might take, and then you can kind of develop an understanding of some of the things that they actually might value. So pretty cool. I would highly encourage you to look some of these up. They're really fun. All right. So, I heard someone talking about the Enneagram earlier. I think that was you, right? So, we love the Enneagram. We love Myers-Briggs. When we go to a different country or a different culture, you can't meet someone from a different culture for the first time and say, what Enneagram number are you? You know, for us, like, we can walk into a room with someone I've never met at Adventures and tell them I'm a 3, and they're like, oh, like, so you do this. Right? We can kind of use that as a quick system, like a quick meet and greet to get to know people. But when you go to different countries, the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs is not going to work. Right? I can't go to an Indian woman and say, are you a 4? And then develop this system of value that I know that she has. So we're going to focus on these 10 cultural values. Like, these are universal. There's 2 different options, basically, in a sliding scale. So the more that we understand these, we're going to know where we land, and it's going to help us see the actions of other people and understand where they might land to help us create a value system that they may have. And again, going back to the point I made earlier, we don't want to apply generalizations, but we use that as a starting point to kind of point us in the right direction, right? So in your packet here, the first 2 pages is this right here. It's called the 10 Cultural Values. All 10 of them are listed, and there's a little scale in between there. So I'm going to go through all 10 of these fairly quickly, and I want you to mark where you think you land on this sliding scale. Does that make sense?
like just all of them real quick right now.
Yeah, I'm going to go through and define them, kind of explain each one. Yeah, not like right now. As we go along.
Do it.
Let's slide over here. See somebody.
Yeah, so grab a pen if you don't have one. All right, you got ready? All right, the first one, individualism, collectivism. The extent to which you think of yourself primarily as an individual versus primarily as a member of a specific group. So if you are an individualist, you value individual goals, individual rights. If you are collectivist, you pay attention to group roles and relationships. All right, power distance. The extent to which you prefer a flat, egalitarian approach to leadership versus a more top-down, hierarchical leadership style. So if you have low power distance, you value equality, you like collaboration. You want decisions to be a result of working together. If you have high power distance, you prefer status. You prefer someone to make the decision and you implement it, or you make the decision and other people implement it. Uncertainty avoidance. The extent to which you prefer to be flexible and adapt to changing circumstances versus reducing and avoiding uncertainty. So if you have low uncertainty avoidance, you love flexibility. You don't mind variables thrown at you. If you have high uncertainty avoidance, you love planning. You probably said yes to this calendar invite. You like spreadsheets. Variables stress you out.
So if I said maybe, probably somewhere in the middle.
Probably somewhere in the middle. Cooperative, competitive. The extent to which you prefer to achieve results collaboratively versus competitively. So if you are cooperative, you prefer to nurture an idea. You start with one simple thing and you kind of nurture it, you kind of change it up as you go, and then you achieve something at the end. You also like collaboration. If you're competitiveness, you make a decision, you stick to it, you're assertive, you are very competitive when it comes to all areas of life. Also on your table, there's a sheet that quickly gives a definition of all of them if you need to look to for reference. Time orientation. The extent to which you prefer to focus on immediate results versus results that may come several years later. If you are short-term oriented, you want success now. You want the things that you are doing to produce immediate results. If you are long-term oriented, you want success later. You want to invest into something for a while to achieve a greater result later on. Context. The extent to which you prefer communication that is explicit and direct versus communication that is more implicit and indirect. So before you mark yourself, I want to make a clarification here. So if you're low context and you're direct, you would maybe have a value for words and verbal communication, whereas high context, indirect, you really like tone, nonverbal, body language. So here's the thing, and my love language is words of affirmation. Words are extremely important to me. However, I am very, very high context. So because of that, I pay more attention to the words that are not being said. So the context of the situation is really important to me. And I'll give you another example. Like, let's say my friend Steve. We agree that we're going to hang out once a week. We alternate who plans that. Steve plans it this week, I plan it the next week, then Steve plans it the next week. And we go on Fridays. But let's say on Thursday, this is the week that he's supposed to plan our time together, and I go to a restaurant and he happens to be there, so we sit together and we hang out for an hour. The next day, I never hear from Steve. He didn't plan anything. Well, I'm frustrated because in the context of us hanging out, he didn't take the time to initiate and plan something, but in his mind, we had that time. So like the context for me is really important. So I'm very much words, but I pay more attention to words that are not being said or in the context of which they are being said.
So you're upset that Steve didn't reach out?
Yeah.
Me too. My context.
Maybe.
Steve's a jerk.
Forget Steve.
Oh, guys, it's such true. You didn't know.
All right, being, doing. The extent to which you prefer quality of life versus proactively working toward goals. So if you are being, you appreciate quality of life, you love the experience, you kind of live in the moment. Whereas if you're doing, you like to be busy all the time. You like meeting goals, kind of having goals as a parameter for your life. Universalism, particularism. The extent to which you prefer to apply the same standards to everyone versus making exceptions for friends and family. So if you are a universalist, you have general rules across the board. Your standards apply to everyone. If you are a particularist, your standards and your rules may flex based upon the relationship. Do your standards for your parents look different than your standards for your coworkers? Friends, coworkers?
Can I ask a clarifying?
Yeah.
Like standard of like how they communicate?
Yeah,
how they-
expectations maybe.
Can you give an example?
Erica, you're more of a universalist.
So I'll use like time as an example. So with like maybe with my friends, I don't really have like a huge value for them being on time or setting a specific time to do something, whereas that's absolutely unacceptable for my coworkers. Or actually, if my mom or my dad is super late to something or don't set a time, that's frustrating to me. So that would make me more of a particularist. Jeremy Knowles yesterday, he said he'd be very much a universalist, and someone asked him why, and he said, I'd give my grandma a speeding ticket. Some people wouldn't.
Yeah.
All right, expressiveness. The extent to which you prefer to hide your emotions versus show them. If you are neutral, you are more non-expressive. If you are effective, you're more expressive with your emotions. This is different than you see something sad and you cry. This is more about your preference of maybe how you communicate. Do you use your emotions to get a point across? Or do you prefer to not use your emotions to communicate a point? So it's not about if you're a feeler. All right, focus. The extent to which you prefer to do one thing at a time versus multitasking. So if you are monochronic, you like to focus on one thing at a time. Your work life and your personal life are very separate. You keep them separate. If you're polychronic, you like to do multiple things at a time. You enjoy the fusion of work life and personal life. It doesn't bother you, it's okay. A lot of us at Adventures are probably forced to live a polychronic life. But do you like it?
So this is more of like a colorful thing versus like, I'm thinking, I've got 4 tabs open. I like to think that I can do stuff, but really I can't. That's more like practical.
Yeah, it's more like more
describe.
preference.
Only 4?
Yeah, only 4. I'm struggling.
I have 4 windows, which each have lots of tabs.
All right. So, everyone good on all your scales? Anyone need to go back to any of them?
Can you explain expressiveness once more? Because what I heard you say, I don't know if what is actually, because like what I heard is like, do you use emotions to manipulate people to respond a certain way?
Okay.
But I'm like, I'm sure that's not what he's actually saying.
Okay, so let's, so if you've heard me speak before, like, I'm trying to think of an example that would apply to everyone. If I'm up in front at training camp and I'm talking about the logistics of a route in terms of budget and travel, I'll communicate a certain way. But if you put me up in front of the stage and you want me to talk about biblical basis for mission or the 1040 window or ministry to Muslims, I kind of use a lot of passion to drive my point across. So I'm okay with like my emotions becoming evident to communicate a point. Not manipulate, but communicate. Does that help?
So is it essentially like, are you okay with others being aware of what you're feeling in a given moment, whether you're feeling it or not, your level of awareness of do they know what I'm feeling?
Yeah.
Is that kind of?
Yeah. So someone who would be maybe more like neutral and non-expressive, they may be super passionate about ministry to Muslims, but when they talk, they don't want to be vulnerable with their emotions and show that they're super passionate. Like, I taught a class on Islam to my church, and during one of the lessons, I like cried through half of it to try to communicate like my desire to see them come to the Lord. Other people would have that same desire, but they would never want to like show that type of emotion. But I'm okay with that. I'm very high. I'm the highest you can go on effective, actually.
Okay.
Does that help clarify a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah. Any other ones?
So if I hate crying in public, but I can't help it when it happens, What side does that put me on?
I would probably put you more on the neutral side because you would prefer not to do that.
Your body deceives you.
Does.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting though is, isn't this all relative? Like, this line, it goes infinitely in both directions, right? And then it only matters how flexible I am compared to someone else. Like, I might be super high uncertainty avoidance, but someone could be higher than me, and then I look like the really flexible one. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. Sure, I think the more that you know where you're at on this scale is going to help you interpret some of your interactions with people. So the goal is not really to like figure out exactly where you land and just stick to it. It's more about like using this as a tool in your relationships with people.
That's good.
You know, what does it look like when these shift based on context of like subject matter? So I think of like, okay, if I apply this to how I operate in my finances or how I operate in my home is different than how I operate at work.
Sure, that's possible. And it probably could even, your results could look different based on the person that you're with and how you interact with them, like with a coworker or with a friend or some different culture. You might change how you interact. That's totally possible. Yeah. So this isn't meant to be like a definitive, this is who I always am. It's meant to kind of like be a guide of this is how I probably usually think, this is how they may think, so let's meet in the middle kind of a thing. It's like a starting point to help you with interactions between people. Cool. All right. Everyone stand up. All right, so take your scale.
Rip it out.
Individualism, collectivism. If you are more individualistic, left side of the room. If you are more collectivistic, right side of the room. Where do you position yourself on the scale?
What if you're in the middle?
Then stand in the middle.
Scale.
Well, we're on the scale, I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, we're like.
What if
Where-
I stand in the room where I feel like I am on the scale?
That's what it
That's what we're
is.
supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I didn't hear that.
Chris is with us.
That's a good idea.
Where do you think most? So I have results of a survey of 60,000 people from all over the world that have also answered this question. Where do you think Anglos would position themselves in the room?
Over here. Over here.
Yeah, on the left. Who would be maybe on the right?
Latinos.
Yeah, Latinos, Arabs, almost everyone else in the world. Power distance. Low power distance on the left, high power distance on the right.
I don't know if I understood this one, actually.
So if you have low power distance, you really prefer collaboration. You want decisions to be made as a group. You work together. High power distance is you prefer one person making the decision, elevations in status, things like that. Where would Anglos position themselves in power distance?
Here?
This is high power over there.
They're actually just a little bit to this side of middle.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Big government.
Now that's probably, I'd be interested to know the difference in like the answers for millennials
Yeah.
versus like baby boomers, for example. Millennials would probably be a little bit more on this side, typically. Who would be like way over here on high power distance?
Socialist? Wait. I don't know. Communist, right? Socialist?
Oh, I don't have those. I don't have political results. Like what type of people? What like cluster of people?
Like an Asian.
Yeah, Asian, Arabs.
But isn't that, aren't those are like monarchies? And a lot of those are, some of those are absolute monarchies, right?
Think of the social order though.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not the political.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, uncertainty avoidance. Low uncertainty avoidance on the left, high uncertainty avoidance on the right.
Right on point.
Yeah, so most Anglos would position themselves on the left with low uncertainty avoidance.
Wait, with flexibility?
Yeah. Yep.
Wait, I don't know.
On the right, high uncertainty avoidance, specifically just two. Latin-based Europe and Latin American.
Wait.
That is so
I know, it's kind of weird. And a lot of people in the middle. Cooperative, competitive. Cooperative on the left, competitive on the right. Okay, pretty diverse. Where do you think Anglos would be in this?
Over there.
Everyone's. They were in the middle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're in the middle. Time orientation. Short term on the left, long term on the right. All right, where do you think Anglos typically are? Short term. There's only one cluster that is all the way on the right, and it's Confucian Asian. Yeah.
Really? We thought that exactly.
All right, context. Low context, direct on the left. High context, indirect on the right. It's pretty split. Anglos fall in the middle, so this kind of equals out. Being, doing. Quality of life, being on the left. Meeting goals, doing on the right. Where do you think Anglos as a whole would be?
Doing.
Yeah, pretty far on doing. Yeah, pretty far on doing.
What about Latins?
Middle. Universalism, particularism. If you're a universalist on the left, particularist on the right.
I didn't understand this one.
Would you give a grant?
I'm not a cop. I don't know.
Like, would you apply the same, like...
All right, universalism for Anglos, Anglos would be universalists. So they ranked more on this side over here.
Who? Anglos?
Wait, can you say that again, please? Sorry.
So Anglos identified more as universalists.
You're universalist, Erica.
You are. You have too much honor and integrity. Not too much. You have perfect amount.
I was struggling with the comprehension of this. I feel like there's nuance.
Expressiveness, neutral on the left, effective on the right. Okay, where do you think Anglos would be?
Probably like there.
Yeah, they're pretty much right in the middle. So people that are super effective and expressive would be Arabs, all Latins, Sub-Saharan Africans. People who are very neutral would be most Europeans and Confucian Asian.
What is Confucian?
I want to know.
No, Confucianism is like, it's a religion, it's a set of laws, it's a set of morals. Yeah, it's mostly like Chinese, people from Taiwan, Japan.
Yeah, quite neutral, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agree.
Focus. Monochronic on the left, polychronic on the right.
Let's go to work and we'll go to lunch together.
Yeah, wow. Do you guys think that this is representative of most Anglos?
No.
Yeah, they're way over here. Yeah, they're way over here. We're kind of over here, it'd be more like Arabs, Latins, Sub-Saharan Africans. Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool. All right, you guys can sit down.
Good try.
So I'm not going to go through these right now, but in this same packet, after those first 2 pages, there's something called Tips for Working with Cultural Value Differences. So as an example, if you look at the first one, individualism, collectivism, if you're an individualist, you could look at the collectivist category and come up with some ideas of what you can do to better engage and work with people who are on the opposite end of the spectrum from you. So obviously this is not a holistic list, but it can kind of be a starting point for various areas that you could work towards when you know that you're working with someone who has a different value system than you do. Cool? Does that make sense? All right, another cool way to kind of help you understand as a starting point some of the cultural values that someone might have is to use cultural proverbs. So before you go into a different country, Google that country's proverbs, read through some of them, and actually start thinking, okay, what part of the value system might be communicated through some of these cultural proverbs? For those of you who steward participants on the field, this is such a cool way to get them acclimated into a culture that they're about to go into. To give them cultural proverbs and help them think through how they could actually use that to prepare them for ministry. So let's use this one as an example. This is an American proverb. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. What of the 10 cultural values might this be speaking to?
Expressiveness,
Yeah.
Why?
because the loudest person in the room gets the attention.
Or the individual,
Yeah, why individualist?
because like, the one who is like on its own, I don't know, kind of similar to that, I guess, the one that's like specifically squeaking out of the other 4 wheels on the car will get the oil, because it's doing its own thing.
Yeah. Anything else?
We're not, well, this is like a negative. Okay. We don't necessarily tend towards being compassionate. So it's not like we're going to try to be proactive for a need, but we're like responsorial, like reactive versus proactive.
Okay, so which of the 10 cultural values might that speak to?
Probably like cooperative versus competitive, maybe.
Yeah.
Because it's like we're competing, so it's not like I'm giving you this because we are collective, but you're my competition, so I'm giving you it because you won't shut up.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so I'm going to give each table a proverb from a different place. I want you guys to discuss for a few minutes what cultural values might be evident through this proverb.
I like that.
All right, so... Huh?
Can we write?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I just want to remember what we said.
Who wants to go first? Read their cultural proverb and then list off a few of the cultural values that it might be speaking to.
Order is half of life. German proverb.
Wow.
Hitler.
Oh!
High uncertainty, possibly. They want, if order is half of life, they want everything to be very certain, probably high power, and also very universalist, where it's all the same for everyone.
Yeah, good.
It's our hypothesis.
Okay, ours was big trees attract strong winds. It's Chinese. And the 3 that we thought of were number 9. Expressiveness. So if a tree is big, it's suggesting that like it's above all the rest, so it's like gonna encounter flack at the ideas that it spreads. So that could be almost like a negative one. And then number 1, individual versus collective. So if you're not necessarily thinking of the group, you're gonna experience flack and resistance. And then the other one, like maybe in a positive light, was the power distance. So if there's a big tree, it's like protecting you. So like the strong winds are not going to be attacking all the littler trees. So it's like a protective thing. So you want to have a big tree to like be up above like the rest of the tree line.
Cool.
Ours says, when head is present, tail should not wag. Indian. We went with pretty high power distance, they value that guy. High uncertainty, competitive, and low context.
Cool.
Very authoritative.
Yeah. What is it when the head?
When head is present, tail should not wag. So, if Bob might do that, I'm not going to give my opinion necessarily. On the tail.
Got it.
Bob might
Okay.
be the head.
Okay.
Just gotta do what you're told.
Yeah. He got the good idea too.
Ours is, he who stirs another's porridge often burns his own.
Mm.
Swedish.
Ugh. Wow.
Steal
Swedes in the porridge.
stirs. Don't forget.
Mind your business.
Where's it from?
Yeah, Sweden.
Sweden.
Yeah.
So what cultural values might that speak to?
So many things. We couldn't really totally
But I think I could see it as like an individualistic thing of like this is like just do your own thing and don't worry about other people's business.
Yeah, it's
It
good.
could also be cooperative, competitive. I don't know. There's like depending on what it really means, you know?
Yeah, I mean that could speak against competition, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, one more we can do together. This is a Korean proverb. Even if the bridge be made of stone, make sure it is safe. What cultural value could that be speaking towards?
High uncertainty avoidance.
Yeah?
What'd you say, Melinda?
The uncertainty avoidance.
Yes.
Maybe universalist, like you wouldn't just assume it's safe because it's made of something strong.
Mhm.
You would like, that's substantial.
Yeah.
Context even. Does, just because they say one thing, maybe
Oh.
make sure it's.
Yeah, like maybe don't take someone's word for it. Look at the context of the situation. Yeah. I also think of time orientation. Like just because it is what it is, like make sure it's high quality. Like it's not just about success now. Like we want the bridge to last. We want it to be safe.
So like long-term versus short-term.
Cool. All right, so with that same frame of mind, we could also look at something called cultural icons. So throughout different countries, different regions, there's different icons that could be a more defining feature of a culture. So this is when we talk about Nordic culture. What do we know about IKEA? Describe IKEA to me. What are some of its features?
Simple, clean, organized,
Easily assembled.
Practical.
practical,
Easily?
order,
Mm-hmm.
The right way to do things.
and then
Yeah. Maybe. So what does this communicate then about some of the values that Nordic culture may have?
Simplicity.
They still value fashion though. You know, you're wrong with like
Yeah.
It was nice.
But simple but not excessive.
Yeah.
So like simple elegance.
they value the living part of life over the amount of money you spend on the thing part of life.
Okay.
Was that living being? Was that?
So that would be.
Being doing.
They do the being.
Okay.
They do the being.
Anything else?
Universal versus particular, maybe?
Why?
Because it's even like how if you get a piece of their furniture, it's in pictures and like there's a little bit of writing, but it's like showing you very clearly like if you are able to do this, you will get the achieved result. So it's less, it's like lacking in nuance. It's just like very much.
It's not like, do it your own way.
Oh, so that's expressive as well.
Could be, yeah.
More neutral than affecting. Or wait. Yeah, more neutral versus effective.
Okay. It's good. All right. Anglo. We love deodorant. What might that communicate about some of our cultural values?
We like the doing over the being.
Oh.
Not what bees smell.
Wait, what?
We want to do smelly.
And not bees smell.
Oh, that's good.
We're like obsessed with cleanliness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably some power distance thing.
Yeah, and maybe that's uncertainty avoidance? High uncertainty avoidance?
How so?
What's the right answer, Patrick?
Like knowing you're not gonna like smell bad.
Right. So yeah, like knowing I
Like I'm
every
planning,
day.
like regardless of what I do, I have this thing to like make sure I don't smell bad.
Yeah. So think about like in most Anglo culture, especially in America, when it was settled, we had a lot of distance between people, right? We value land and separation. And so the idea of getting close to someone physically is not really super attractive. So deodorant is really like, not even usually for our benefit, we would put it on so we don't want other people to smell us, right? So what could that communicate about our cultural value?
Individualism versus collective.
Yeah, could be.
I mean, kind of. What you're saying would mold more to collectivism, like we're caring about the greater person. Like, so you don't smell me. But ultimately, I don't want you to smell me because I'm afraid of the way that I smell, which is individualistic. It's actually about me, not really about you.
Yeah, because I would say we don't want them to smell us, but it's more of you're protecting your own reputation.
I want to smell drums.
Right. Yeah. All right, Germany. How many of you have ever heard of quiet hours? The idea of quiet hours. This is big in northern Germany. So a lot of cultures between like 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. during the week, all day on Sunday, and on holidays, you have to be super quiet. Don't mow your lawn. Don't play loud music. What could this communicate about some of their cultural
Can I have a
values?
question? You said on Sundays?
Yeah.
Wow.
They were
Collectivism for sure.
Why is it collectivism?
Because you're thinking of the greater good and not just, oh, I want to mow my lawn on this day because I don't have to work. It's, oh, this is the day that we honor God and we are quiet and contemplative. So it's like a bigger picture thing. Looking through their cultural lens. I'm not saying you have to honor God, but be quiet. And universal? Or wait, no. Well, yes.
They're all, yeah, universal. so they're all
Universal,
good.
because if they're all doing it,
It could be expressive and non-expressive.
Yeah, they apply the same standard, like if you're the president, you still have to do this versus,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think of it as individualistic, 'cause it's like, I want my rights to be protected, like my space, and you can protect your rights in your space. And in order for me to get what I want, we both need to agree to be quiet.
Yeah. It could almost be this was established based on individualism, but could be masked as like forced collectivism, but based on individual preferences.
Yeah, I would see it as high power with order and control,
Mhm.
where I don't want or trust individuals to make their own decisions to messing up the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very low context.
Yeah.
This is the context.
I was toying back and forth of which one to use for Anglo. I ended up with deodorant, obviously, and because I was using quiet hours for Germany, I was going to use garages for Anglo. Kind of communicates the same thing as like quiet hours a little bit. All right, Matryoshka dolls in Eastern Europe. You guys know what these are?
Yeah.
The picture is pretty descriptive. Yeah. What does this cultural icon communicate about some of their cultural values?
Maternal, or wait, shoot, cultural values. I don't know, I gotta get it under my feet.
Do you always think about this country?
Yeah.
What?
Like when you travel, do you see like something for sale and you think about what their cultural value is?
I mean, not every single thing, but I do generally think this way. Yeah.
well, wouldn't it be collectivistic? Because it's like, that doll doesn't have its own, like, identity. It's like part of
Wow.
one, like, bigger doll. It's like, you just come right in and you get collected
Yeah.
into this.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things about Matryoshka dolls is when you take one and you start uncapping, you have no idea when it's going to end. And it's kind of like a surprise every time, like there's another one. And if you think about Eastern Europe and how much transition they've gone through with communism and being controlled by different people, could be an interesting correlation. Chopsticks, Confucian Asia. What does this communicate about their cultural values?
Maybe the being first in doing, because it like, you have to enjoy your food, you only get so much. Your meat.
It's very inefficient.
Time commitment.
Long-term oriented.
Thank you.
Slow down.
Okay. Do you guys know the origins of chopsticks? Why they were created? So Confucian believed that knives and forks were a symbol of aggression and violence. And he said that food should be cut up in a butchery. It's not a place. Aggression and violence is not something that you want to bring to the table when you're sitting
Wow.
around with people. So we use chopsticks.
And everything's already cut.
Everything's cut. You don't have to like extend in violence or aggression to do something.
Wow.
You just take your food very peacefully.
Okay.
I mean, Confucius said a lot.
But he also.
So what would that say? If you know the history of chopsticks, what cultural value may they have then?
Cooperative as opposed to competitive.
Okay, tell me why.
Because even in like a very intimate space of being at the table, you're trying to have that relational, like you're super valuing a relationship instead of like, this is literally not the space for it to be like tit for tat. It's like, how are we having trust?
Yeah, anything else?
Expressiveness,
Tell me why.
just if it's like no aggression, so it's like bringing forth just peaceful.
Yeah?
Wait, so would that be like neutral or effective? The high one or the low one? First.
I'm not sure.
Neutral would be not using emotion to communicate.
So
Right,
then
but I'm saying what was her?
effective.
Or it could be neutral because they're not being expressive with aggression. They're being neutral with, they don't want to cause, they just want to be the peacemaker.
Could be, yeah. One more. Ubuntu. Have you guys ever heard of this idea?
Yeah.
Ubuntu is the idea of I am because we all are. I am because we are. What does that say about their cultural values?
Collectivism.
Yeah. Anything else other than collectivism?
Universalism.
Instead of doing,
Low power distance.
yeah,
Yeah. Low power distance is one that I think of, yeah.
Low uncertainty avoidance.
Okay, tell me why.
Because it kind of, in a way, it puts it back into your hands, like, I'm going to be this way because we want to be this way collectively. Whereas like, I'm not going to give you strict rules, laws, things. It's like we all operate together in this, so I'm not gonna dictate it because I'm kind of already dictating it by saying I am because we are, so therefore you are. You need to like fall in line because I am.
Yeah, I would agree with that because if your actions dictate the reputation of the group, you don't want variables. You don't want to be the variable because then it affects everyone else. Yeah, it's good.
Oh.
So this is just a cool way to like, if you're going to a different place, you could research cultural icons and actually like dive deep into it and kind of analyze it to kind of determine what some of those cultural values might be. So that is it. We're out of time. This is what we're talking about next week. The 3 cultural lenses: guilt, innocence, fear, power, shame, honor. So we're going to kind of define these as a way to understand culture, and then we're going to dig super deep into Scripture and help us contextualize culture to help us be better sharers of the gospel. Like the gospel, Paul does this really well. He explains the gospel in a way that touches various different aspects of cultural themes. And so we're going to get into those pretty deeply next week.
Hey, can I ask you a question about that? You sent a little survey out.
Yeah.
I completed the survey. I don't think I got individual results, but like it sent me results that was like, this is what you're, like the people group that you associate with.
It's your individual results.
Oh,
It's the wording's confusing, but those are your results. Yeah.
Okay.
Which I was confused about also because I answered it as most Anglo-Americans would, that I am aware of would answer it,
Yeah.
not necessarily what I would say.
Yeah, I tried to clarify the email by saying answer it from your own perspective. So you could probably take it again and answer it for yourself.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we were going to get to that this morning, but
The results that are not collective results. The results that you got were your individual.
Correct. Yeah. So you could bring those results to next week. Well, we're going to talk about them next week.
I don't think you did.
Thanks, guys.